On June 11, 1944, a narrow road south of Saint-Côme-du-Mont turned into a trap. Not a battlefield in the clean map-room sense. A strip of raised causeway. Flooded marsh on both sides. 4 bridges in a line. And at the far end, a hedgerow full of German rifles, machine guns, mortars and artillery observers, waiting for the next American to lift his head. Lieutenant Colonel Robert G. Cole was lying in the mud with his battalion pressed flat behind him. The 3rd Battalion, 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, had already been bled hard since D-Day. By that afternoon, roughly 400 exhausted paratroopers were pinned on a road so narrow that retreat felt like death and advance looked worse. Ahead of them, the final bridge was partially blocked by a Belgian gate, a steel anti-tank obstacle that turned the road into a funnel. 1 man at a time could squeeze through. 1 man at a time could be killed there. Cole looked toward the hedgerow. Then he reached for the pistol on his hip, a government model 4.5. The pistol everyone thinks they know, the movie gun, the officer's sidearm, the slab-sided American legend. But at that moment, it was not a symbol. It was the only weapon in the hand of the man expected to move first. And here is the strange thing. The most important fact about that pistol is not that it was powerful. It is not that it was famous. It is not even that Robert Cole carried one into one of the most desperate American infantry charges in Normandy. The most important fact is this. Years before that moment, the United States Army had discovered that the pistol could injure the hand that fired it, and then actually fixed it. Not in legend, not in hindsight, not because a war forced them. They fixed a real flaw while there was still time. And later, when soldiers invented another flaw that sounded terrifying but had no evidence behind it, the same institution did something just as rare. It refused to pretend the myth was real. That is the real story of the M1911A1. Not a perfect gun, not a magic gun, a weapon shaped by the difference between blood on a soldier's hand and noise in a soldier's imagination. To understand why that matters, the trail does not start in Normandy. It starts in a small gun shop in Ogden, Utah, with a boy who learned machinery before he learned reputation. John Moses Browning was born on January 23, 1855, in Utah Territory, into a family that looked ordinary only from the street. His father, Jonathan Browning, was a blacksmith and gunsmith, a Mormon migrant, and the father of a very large household. There was no engineering school waiting for John, no laboratory, no corporate research department. There was a bench, a forge, files, springs, steel, and a father who let his sons learn with real tools while other boys were still being kept away from sharp edges. By 7, John was working in the shop. By 11, he had built a functioning rifle from spare parts and used it to bring home prairie chickens. That was not a miracle. That was the beginning of a habit. Browning did not become the most important firearms designer in American history because one perfect idea fell into his hands. He became that because, for decades, he kept seeing where a machine failed to meet a human hand. Then he changed the machine. In 1879, when he was 24, Browning received his first firearm patent. He sold a single-shot rifle designed to Winchester for $8,000, a fortune to a young gunsmith, and a lesson he never forgot. Winchester owned the profits after that. Browning owned the experience. Over the next 3 decades, his designs moved through lever-action rifles, shotguns, machine guns, and self-loading mechanisms. By the time the American Army came looking for a new pistol, Browning was not a young inventor chasing fame. He was a patient mechanic with a frightening understanding of recoil, timing, leverage, and grip. The Army's problem was not theoretical. It had already cost lives. At the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, American troops in the Philippines were carrying a .38 long Colt revolver. On paper, it was a modern service sidearm. In the field, against determined Moro fighters at close range, soldiers reported something horrifying. Men were being hit, sometimes more than once, and still closing the distance. The army dragged old 45 Colt revolvers back into service because the smaller cartridge had lost the one argument a sidearm cannot afford to lose. It did not stop the fight fast enough. In 1904, the Ordnance Department ordered formal testing under Colonel John T. Thompson and Colonel Louis Lagarde. The methods were crude by modern standards: carcasses, cadavers, measurements, wound behavior, but the conclusion was direct. For close-range military stopping power, the Army wanted nothing smaller than .45 caliber. Browning had been working around a smaller automatic pistol cartridge. He changed course. The pistol that became famous did not begin as a cultural icon. It began as an answer to a field failure, a cartridge failure, a human problem. The result was .45 ACP. After years of trials, refinements, rival designs, endurance tests, and Army hesitation, Browning's pistol was adopted on March 29, 1911. That is where the name came from. M1911. When America entered the First World War in 1917, Colt and Springfield Armory pushed production as fast as wartime demand required. By the armistice in November 1918, roughly 643,000 pistols had been produced, enough for the weapon to leave the testing range and enter mud, trenches, horses, training camps, depots, and the ordinary abuse of soldiers who do not care what a designer intended. And that is where the first real flaw appeared. Not a catastrophic failure, not exploding metal, not a broken action, something smaller, more intimate. Under recoil, the web of the shooter's hand, the soft skin between thumb and forefinger, could be pinched between the hammer spur and the grip safety as the pistol cycled. One shot might do nothing. Rapid fire could open the skin. A soldier would fire the weapon, and the weapon would bite him back. The name was simple: hammer bite. This mattered because small failures are the failures institutions love to ignore. A pistol that explodes cannot be explained away. A pistol that draws blood from a man's hand can be blamed on grip, or training, or softness, or bad luck. It can be turned into the soldier's problem. And for many armies, that is exactly where the story would have ended. A strip of tape over the back of the grip, a warning passed between men, an old injury accepted as the price of an issued weapon. But the American cavalry noticed. Cavalrymen fired the pistol one-handed, often fast, often from awkward body positions, and their complaints were harder to dismiss because their job made the flaw repeatable. Then, in 1921, a junior officer named William H. Wenstrom filed the kind of report history usually loses. He was a first lieutenant in the 1st Cavalry Regiment, working from a frontier post in Arizona. Not a celebrity, not a general, not a designer. A tester with a pistol, a horse, and enough honesty to write down what was happening. His report did more than complain about hammerbite. It described control. It described how inexperienced shooters tended to drive shots low. It pointed at the shape of the grip itself, the flat mainspring housing at the back of the pistol, and argued that the geometry of the handgun was helping the muzzle dip under recoil. That is not glamorous. It is almost boring, but it is exactly the kind of boring that saves lives later. Wenstrom's proposed solution was a change in shape, an arched mainspring housing that filled the palm differently, a shorter trigger for better reach, a longer grip safety tang to shield the hand, a shortened hammer spur to close the biting gap, relief cuts behind the trigger, a front sight easier to see. None of this changed the heart of Browning's locked breech design. The gun did not need a new sole. It needed better contact with the human hand. That distinction matters. A weak institution hears a complaint and protects the old specification. A theatrical institution waits for a scandal. A disciplined institution asks the quiet question: what part of the machine is making the human worse? Springfield Armory and the Army's boards tested the changes. Colt submitted modified pistols. And the Army did not simply say, "Good idea for later." It stopped accepting the old pattern. Colt retooled. Older pistols cycling through depots were rebuilt piece by piece. No parade, no poster, no headline, just thousands of small parts moving through an ordnance system until the old pain point disappeared from the future issue weapon. In 1926, the modified pistol received its new designation, M1911A1. That is the pistol most Americans actually carried in the Second World War. Not the untouched 1911 of legend. The corrected one. The one with the Army's quiet paperwork inside it. Now put that next to what other armies tolerated. Germany fielded beautifully machined sidearms that could become temperamental when dirt, sand, and battlefield abuse entered the mechanism. The Soviet TT-33 lacked the kind of manual safety many armies would have considered reassuring. Britain's Sten submachine gun became infamous for dangerous handling problems if mistreated. Japan's Nambu pistols earned grim reputations among soldiers who did not trust their springs or ergonomics. Every industrial army had flaws in its weapons. Every one of them had reasons to keep production moving anyway. War rewards output. War forgives ugly compromises when the alternative is empty hands. But the M1911A1 correction happened before the next war. That is the uncomfortable part. The Army could have ignored it. No one in 1921 could prove that a corrected grip safety would matter on a French causeway in 1944. No one could point to Carentan. No one could point to Robert Cole. No one could point to 400 pinned paratroopers and say, "Fix it now, because one day a battalion commander will need this pistol to behave perfectly while he stands up in front of machine guns." They fixed it anyway. And that is why the story returns to Normandy. By June 11th, 1944, Robert Cole's battalion had already survived the chaos of the airborne landings. Like many paratroopers that night, Cole had been dropped far from where the plan said he should be. He gathered men from scattered units, linked up with troops coming inland from Utah Beach, and kept moving. Carentan mattered because it connected Utah and Omaha. If the Germans could hold the seam between the American beachheads, they could threaten the entire lodgment before it became one front. So the 101st Airborne was ordered toward the road south of Saint-Côme-du-Mont. The men later called it Purple Heart Lane. That name was earned. The road crossed flooded marshland on a raised causeway, with no room to spread out and almost no cover. A battalion on that road was not a formation. It was a line of men waiting for the next burst to find them. German defenders near the hedgerow around the farm had the ground measured. They had the cover. They had the fire lanes. They had time. Cole had casualties. Mud. A blocked bridge. And a battalion slowly being reduced by staying exactly where it was. There are moments in combat where every option is bad, but one option at least moves forward. Cole chose that one. He stood up, in the open, in daylight, with his .45 automatic in his hand. Then he ordered a bayonet charge. At first, only a small number of men rose with him. That is one of the details that makes the story feel human, instead of cinematic. The charge did not begin as a perfect wave. It began as hesitation, fear, confusion. A few men moving because the man in front of them was moving. Then more. Then enough. The pinned battalion became an attacking battalion. They pushed through the gate, over the open ground, toward the hedgerow that had been killing them from cover. Cole still had the pistol as he led them in. At some point, he grabbed a fallen soldier's rifle and bayonet for the close work ahead. But the first signal was the same. The commander upright, moving forward, pistol in hand. This was not how infantry doctrine imagined a battalion commander should win a firefight. Rifles were supposed to win firefights. Machine guns were supposed to win firefights. Artillery was supposed to break positions. A pistol was a last weapon, an officer's badge, a backup tool. No manual was built around a lieutenant colonel standing on a causeway and using his sidearm as the first visible proof that the battalion was not going to die in the ditch. But soldiers do not follow doctrine. They follow the thing they can see. And that afternoon they saw coal stand up. The charge succeeded at terrible cost. The causeway opened. The road into Carentan was forced. The Utah and Omaha beachheads became one continuous American front. The pistol did not win the battle by itself. That is the childish version of the story. The pistol did something smaller and more important. It worked in the hand of the man who had to start the impossible movement. It did not cut him. It did not make him adjust his grip. It did not punish the hand holding it at the worst possible second. A quiet fix from 1921 had arrived on time in 1944. And still, the pistol was not universally loved inside the army. That part is often left out. By the late 1930s, serious officers were asking whether pistols belonged in infantry service at all. Handguns were hard to shoot under stress. Most soldiers, even trained soldiers, did not become good pistol shots just because the weapon was issued. That doubt helped push the development of the M1 carbine. A lighter shoulder weapon meant to give drivers, radio men, officers, and support troops something easier to hit with than a sidearm. So the argument was never simply, the pistol is legendary. The real argument was colder. A pistol is limited. A pistol is difficult. A pistol is not a rifle. But when a soldier needed one hand free, when a paratrooper was climbing, dragging, steering, signaling, or moving through a doorway, when a man wanted a weapon strapped to his body even after everything else had gone wrong, the 45 kept appearing on hips where the official table of equipment did not always put it. Men traded for them, scrounged them, borrowed them permanently. A weapon can be debated in offices and still be voted for by the hands of the men at the front. That was one verdict. But there was another story growing around the gun. Not a report, not a test, not an injury, a rumor. The legend went like this. An American fires his M1911 until it runs empty. The slide locks back. The empty pistol makes a distinct metallic sound. Somewhere close by, an enemy soldier hears it, recognizes it, and charges before the American can reload. It is the pistol version of the famous M1 Garand ping story. The idea that enemy soldiers waited for the sound of an empty rifle clip before rushing an American position. The pistol version was less famous, but it lived the same way. Barracks talk, veteran memory, war, movies, gun counter certainty. A story repeated so confidently that confidence itself became the evidence. But confidence is not evidence. Start with the sound. A slide locking back on an empty pistol is a small mechanical event. Real combat is not. Rifles crack, machine guns hammer, mortars slam pressure into the air. Artillery makes the ground talk through your bones. Men shout, gear rattles, ears ring. A soldier close enough to hear a slide lock back would have to be absurdly near, in an unlikely pause, with his own hearing still clear, while also correctly identifying the exact sound of an American pistol under battlefield conditions. That is not impossible in a quiet room. It is fantasy in most firefights. Then consider the timing. A practiced reload on a 1911 can happen in a few seconds. Drop the magazine. Seat the next one. Release the slide. Back in the fight. An enemy who decides to rush across open ground during that window must assume no other American is watching, no rifle is covering the position, no machine gun is still firing, and no second weapon is nearby. That is not a tactic. That is a bet against every other man in the fight. And the documents do not rescue the legend. No captured German or Japanese training manual has surfaced teaching troops to listen for an American sidearm running empty. No verified interrogation account has established it as a doctrine. Even the louder, more famous Carentan story has never cleared the documentary bar people wish it had. The pistol myth clears it even less. But the myth survived because it answered a feeling. Close combat makes men suspicious of every sound. A snapped twig becomes a warning. A bolt cycling becomes a question. A mechanical noise in the dark becomes a story, because stories give shape to fear. The legend was not stupid, it was human, but it was not true enough to deserve redesign. And this is where the M1911A1 becomes more than a gun story. The real Flaw left blood. The army followed it. The imaginary Flaw produced fear. The army did not chase it. That is harder than it sounds. Institutions love visible action. They love proving they are serious. They love fixing whatever people are shouting about, even when the shouting has no foundation. But in this case, the same ordnance culture that retooled a pistol over a hand injury did not waste itself redesigning around a ghost. It acted when the evidence was real. It stayed still when the evidence was not. Call that the discipline of proof, not brilliance, not luck. Discipline. The kind that understands a soldier's cut hand is data, but a dramatic rumor is not. The kind that knows not every fear deserves a new part number. The kind that can spend money before a crisis and refuse panic during a legend. There was another proof of the original 45 decision far from Normandy. On July 7, 1944, on Saipan, Japanese forces launched one of the largest mass infantry charges of the Pacific War near Tanapag. Thousands of men, including wounded soldiers pressed into the final attack, came forward in the pre-dawn darkness. American lines were overrun in places. The fighting became close, brutal, and hand-to-hand. Rifles, machine guns, grenades, and sidearms all became part of the same desperate argument at point-blank range. This was the nightmare the army had been thinking about since the Philippines. A determined close assault that did not stop just because men were hit. By the end, the attack had failed at catastrophic cost. Japanese commanders increasingly shifted away from mass charges and toward deeper, more static defensive systems. The old problem had reached its most extreme form and broken itself against modern firepower. The pistol was only one small instrument in that wider violence, but its caliber, its purpose, and its continued presence in American hands all traced back to the same question the Army had asked 4 decades earlier. What does a soldier need when distance disappears? The chain is almost too neat, which is why it should not be treated as destiny. A blacksmith's son learns metal by feel in Utah. An army discovers a revolver can fail against determined men in the Philippines. A formal test demands a larger caliber. A designer builds around it. A world war issues the pistol by the hundreds of thousands. Then soldiers discover the weapon injures their hands. A junior cavalry officer writes down the problem instead of living with it. An ordnance system listens. A new pattern is accepted. Old pistols are rebuilt. 18 years later, on a causeway in Normandy, a battalion commander draws the corrected weapon and stands up. None of those links had to hold. Most chains in history break because one person shrugs, because one file is ignored, because one small flaw is considered too small, because one myth is more exciting than one test. John Browning did not live to see Robert Cole's charge. He died on November 26, 1926, at the Fabrique Nationale plant in Liège, Belgium, while still working, still designing, still doing the thing he had begun as a boy in Ogden. He left behind 128 firearm patents and a design family that outlived the world that created it. His final pistol project became the Browning High Power after Dieudonné Save completed it. His 1911 pattern remained in American service for generations. long after newer pistols replaced it in general issue. Specialized versions still found their way into the hands of American units in later wars. Competitive shooters still build careers around its grip angle, trigger, and recoil behavior. The machine lasted. But the more interesting legacy is not the steel. It is the process hidden inside the steel. Browning designed a weapon around a real battlefield need. The army altered it around a real human wound. And when folklore tried to invent a different weakness, the evidence refused to follow. That is why the pistol on Cole's hip matters. Not because legends are always wrong. Not because the M1911A1 was flawless. It was heavy. It had limited capacity. It demanded skill. It was a pistol, not a rifle, and no honest history should pretend otherwise. But when the story became real, when mud, fear, gunfire, and a blocked causeway left one commander with no clean option, the corrected weapon did what a tool is supposed to do. It disappeared into the task. It did not become the problem. Robert Cole did not live long enough to grow old with the story. He was killed in the Netherlands on September 18, 1944, during Operation Market Garden. His Medal of Honor for the bayonet charge near Carentan was awarded after his death. The country remembered him as a man who stood up first. That is true. But inside that remembered moment is a quieter truth. A pistol worked because years earlier, someone believed a small injury was worth fixing. And a myth died nowhere in particular because no evidence ever made it worth chasing. History often turns on the loud thing. This one turned on the quiet one. A report, a redesign, a hand that did not bleed, and a man who could close his fingers around the grip when everyone behind him needed to see him move.